for high-quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic True Health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 415. I am so excited for today's guest. We're going to have a fantastic show today. Nikki Kenward has such an amazing story and such wonderful, heartfelt lessons to teach us today. Nikki, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. And it's a real delight to be here and talk to you.
Absolutely. I really love the work that you do. Nikki has been an Upledger CranioSacral therapist for over 25 years. And her focus is on mental health and the gut. And, you know, we've covered those topics several times separately. So the mental health's over here, the gut is over here. And and we don't ever really talk about that there's a direct link between mental health and gut health. And also that so many people feel ashamed to talk about their mental health and also ashamed to talk about their gut health. There's some kind of stigma in today's society about having gastrointestinal distress and symptoms, and as well having mental and emotional health symptoms. So the fact that you help people to heal their gut and heal their emotional and mental state and come back into a place of balance is so beautiful. So I'm excited for us to learn from you today, Nikki.
Great. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, Nikki's website is nikkikenward.com. And of course, the links to everything that Nikki does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. I want to start by diving into your story because I feel that there's a really interesting story that led you to become the expert that you are today and the healer that you are today.
So where would you like me to start?
Well, what happened in your youth that made you go in this direction?
Well, so I went in the direction of craniosacral therapy actually quite late in life. I was around 39, 40 at the time because I'd been a dance therapist and needed to get another string to my bow and was really fascinated by it and fell in love with that. And I soon realized as I got deeper into craniosacral therapy and especially the somato-emotional release work that we do with the Upledger work, that all kinds of, that the body process work was so important, looking at our emotional history that was held in our body and supporting that experience, the experience people have on the couch when you've got your hands on, to help them move forward and integrate these experiences. And so, yeah, for myself, I had some incredible support during my craniosacral training, especially the advanced classes, where I got to deal with all kinds of trauma from my childhood in a way that really transformed my life. So it's all about the emotional history being written in the body.
When you said you're a dance therapist, what is that? Is that like a physical therapist or is that an emotional therapist?
Well, a dance therapist will dance with people. So it's really about the emotions, expression of the emotions, but through the body. So not really that bigger step away from the work I do as a craniosacral therapist.
I'm fascinated. I've never heard of dance therapy.
Yeah.
What is really so if I were to go to a dance therapist, it would be like we'd be doing the waltz or the tango while talking about my emotions. How does that work?
Well, it would be more they would help you explore through movements that felt authentic to you, how you were feeling in your body. So it's about helping you connect to that emotional history in your body and express it in whatever way is helpful to you, and they would support that.
Oh, I can see how that could be really helpful, especially because we have so much body shame.
Exactly. Yeah, we do.
Very interesting. So you started to use craniosacral therapy in conjunction with dance therapy. What happened? Like, did you have some aha moments? What happened when you were first integrating craniosacral therapy with your clients?
I think there were some. Can you have a gradual aha moment? I
Sure.
think I had a gradual aha moment quite early on, that it wasn't so much about what you were doing with your hands or your body. It was more about the space between you and the person on the couch, and creating a safe space so that person is able to do and express and experience what they need to on the couch that day, that's helpful to their process.
For those who've never heard of craniosacral therapy, could you explain what it is? Now, I know you are very well versed in it. So you have like a higher understanding of what it
Mhm.
does. And I think it affects the body on many levels. But for those who've never
Sure.
heard of it, just walk us through what is craniosacral therapy? Who is it good for? Why should we go and experience craniosacral therapy as a client?
Sure. So, craniosacral therapy works from the cranium, the head, down to the sacrum, the bottom end of the spine between your hips. So, these bones, of course, contain our central nervous system, the brain, spinal cord, all the fluids in that system. That's the core system in the body that impacts on every single part of the body, all the fascia, all the organs coming from the central nervous system. So, what craniosacral therapy does is listen really carefully to that system with a gentle pair of skillful hands to look for and release any restrictions around the system. So, it's hands on, but it's gentle, it's listening, it's without agenda. And it works, so it can work on a very physical basis. So somebody might come with a stiff neck or concussion or migraines, or after a spinal surgery perhaps, and you can really help get things more functional. You can free things up for the migraine headache sufferer. You can work with the jaw. So it doesn't have to be on anything other than a physical level. But it very often seems to go deeper than that. It takes people into a very deep state of rest in their system, which really allows them to start healing and processing whatever might be helpful to them. So then, while you're working, a memory or of an event or an emotion might come up into their awareness. And we don't analyze it. We're not psychotherapists, but we support their experience of it through the dialoguing, guided imagery. And as a result of them going into that piece of their emotional history and that part of the body where we have our hands, we are able to get release of emotion from the tissue. And the tissue will then release much more fully than if it hadn't gone to a deeper level, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I studied craniosacral therapy in the 90s.
Ah, did you?
I did. I went to the Canadian College of Massage and Hydrotherapy, and I chose to take courses in it to augment what I was learning and what I was doing.
Sure, yeah.
And I was really blown away. I
Mm,
love the first book. I can't remember the name of it, but with the very first book they have you read and the stories, Dr. Upledger's stories when he was first
oh,
doing it. Like the maybe you
I
could share
know.
some of those stories, like the man who had bombs. He was a soldier and he had bombs go off, and he had post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and extreme anger, and he was in
Yes,
constant pain.
yes.
And then there was another, like, wasn't there like a child who couldn't walk?
Yes, so there are many wonderful stories, and I think the great joy and beauty of this work is that it's a very respectful, listening, passive pair of hands in a safe space, which
Mm.
really activates the body's self healing mechanisms.
Would you be able to just fill in those stories that I mentioned and tell those stories for listeners who've never heard of them so they have an understanding of the depth of craniosacral
So,
therapy?
yes, so I was really lucky and I did some studying with Dr. John. I've also worked
Wow.
at intensive therapy programs in the Institute in West Palm Beach with military veterans. And of course, they had often horrific post traumatic stress
Mm-hmm.
disorder from the bombs, maybe some injuries that they'd sustained. And and they were given lots of medication and maybe some talking therapy, but often it was very hard for them to move forward from a place of fear, anxiety, hopelessness, depression, and there were many suicides. So Dr. John was a really an innovator in that he created these intensive programs where there would be a small group of military veterans, and I've worked on these programs, that would be at the Institute for a week, all day, every day for a week, and they would be in the same room, and there would be a lead therapist and two, three, or four assistant therapists for every person on the table. And they would then be able, in that really safe, consistent space, be able to really explore their experiences, release some of that fear, begin to rebalance some of their autonomic nervous system, find hope, lift the depression, recover better from injuries. I mean, the results were phenomenal.
I love it. I love it. Right. And I remember I just remember crying reading that
Yeah,
book
yeah,
because of the the amount of healing, like that the one soldier he talks about who was able to recover from the anger and the pain and that Dr. Upledger, as he was very gently only putting about 4 ounces of pressure, but very gently
yeah,
felt the joints of the skull release from that pressure,
yes,
and
yes,
then the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid could finally flow, which of course affects the brain. And that
yes,
was yes, there's an emotional healing, there's also a very real physical healing, and that he was able
absolutely.
to heal on an emotional and physical level. And that I remember just like being so happy reading that book, because that hearing about that, I think it was like a child that couldn't walk, and then the child grew up and then came back to John and was like, "Hey,
That's
remember
right.
me?"
Yes, yeah, 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 absolutely. And of course, the emotional and physical healing are one thing. So the emotional process is held in the tissues that are tight.
Mm. Now it's
So
such.
it's a mind body experience always. The two things are done
Mhm.
simultaneously, are one healing process.
It's such
And
light touch that it's
yeah,
sometimes we discredit its validity in our mind. Well, how
mm,
you're touching me so lightly, how could that have made any difference? How do you address
yeah.
that?
Well, people often say that to me. They say, "Oh, I feel very relaxed, but you didn't do anything," especially if it's their first session. And I say, "No, that's fine." They look a bit guilty saying that. And I do explain it. I say, "Well, what we're working with are the nerves, the cerebral spinal fluid flow, and the fascia, the membranes that surround the brain and the spinal cord. And all of these tissues only respond and relax with a very gentle touch. So that's part of their anatomy. So if you were to push really hard on them, they would just either they would do nothing or they would get more tight and resist. And
Hmm.
then I suggest to people they might like to mix up some corn flour and water in a bowl when they get home. Don't know
Somewhat.
if you've ever, if you mix up corn flour, like a very fine flour and water in a bowl,
Mm-hmm.
and if you stir it around, now if you prod it hard with your finger, it feels like wood or concrete.
Ah, right. I remember that we did this as kids. You take like 2 cups of
Yeah,
corn flour and I don't know, maybe a
yes,
cup and a half of water, and then you mix it
exactly.
together. That's right. It acts solid if you pound on it, but if you just gently put your finger on it, it's like quicksand.
It flows.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the collagen in the fascia makes fascia behave like that. So that's why we need a gentle touch. And nerve fibers are 50 to 70% fascia. So if you're working with the nervous system, with the dural membrane in the skull and in the spine, and the fluid flow, you need to be gentle or nothing's going to happen. And I say, well, if you go and see a chiropractor, they'll do what they do to line up the bones of your spine, and that's great. You go and see a massage therapist, very often they'll be aiming to lengthen and massage knots out of your muscles, so they need often more pressure. Mm-hmm. But if you come and see me, I'm not working on either of those systems. I'm working with your craniosacral system, and that requires that I have a gentle touch in order for it to release.
So your intention as you worked with your clients for dance therapy and craniosacral therapy was to help them on an emotional level and then also help them on a physical level in the nervous system and the cerebrospinal fluid. Mm-hmm. Understanding that there's obviously a connection between our brain health and our emotional mental health. But as you began to work with clients and they were helping them to release and helping them to heal on both physical and emotional levels, mm-hmm. When did you start to see a connection to gut health?
Well, that was probably now about 4 or 5 years ago. I began to see it because there suddenly was a whole raft of books about gut health beginning to come out at that time. There were lots of people talking about the microbiome, the gut bacteria. There were people talking about the gut-brain axis between, the gut, the mm-hmm. brain in the gut, and the brain in the head. And I got very interested in all of this and began reading a lot. I was particularly interested because lots of my clients coming to me had what I would call post-traumatic gut. They'd had difficult experiences. They had a lot of emotional history buried in their gut. And I didn't really know how to properly help them. I was in the same situation as them. I had post-traumatic stress disorder arrived in my life about 15 years ago, but the worst part of it was the gut. And that was what I've struggled with since then. And I always felt for all the therapy I'd had, CST, talking therapy, you name it, I've probably done it. There was a missing piece. There was something I couldn't quite get to in my gut. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. I felt disconnected and disassociated from it. So that was also a big motivation besides my curiosity in the research coming out. So as a result of all that, I thought, right, I need to make some new kind of training for myself and my colleagues so we can work with the enteric nervous system in the gut, which of course talks to and is part of our central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, because it's just as important. So that was the time at which I approached the International Association of Healthcare Educators, for whom I'd been a certified educator for many years already. And I rather sheepishly said to them, how do you fancy me writing a class on the gut and the enteric nervous system? And they were interested. So the next stage I had to do a presentation about it at the Beyond the Dura conference in Palm Beach a few years ago. And people responded well. So I was invited to write an outline of the class, which I did. That was sent around to the international faculty for comment. I then wrote the whole 4-day class. And the rest, as they say, is history. So I've been teaching that internationally for about 2 years now. And it was during that process that I was approached, in fact, in the same week by 2 publishers to write the book.
Very cool. What is the enteric nervous system?
The enteric nervous system is the nervous system that is embedded in the whole of the gut. So if we think of the gut as a long tube going from the mouth down the esophagus, through the stomach, wriggling around the small intestine, colon, and out through the rectum and anal canal, anus. That long tube is our gut. It's 9 meters long. And there is a network of our enteric nervous system stretching up to the esophagus and all the way down to the anal canal. It's complex. It's like a modern data processing center. And it talks to the brain in our head all the time. It also makes its own decisions a lot of the time without referring to the brain in the head. So that's our enteric nervous system. It's massive. It has as many neurons in it as our spinal cord.
Amazing.
Isn't it?
How do we feel our enteric nervous system, or like, could you maybe give some examples of when we're experiencing it?
Yeah, sure. Well, a couple of things really easily come to mind. So if we're feeling very anxious, sometimes it's difficult to swallow, right? So that would be one thing. When we're eating, it can make it really difficult if we're very anxious. If we're scared, maybe we're going on stage or we're meeting a new person or going into a situation where we feel really out of our comfort zone, we'll get butterflies in our stomach.
Mm-hmm.
That's our enteric nervous system. If we eat something that's poisonous or doesn't suit our particular digestive system, our gut, we'll get all those horrible cramps and nausea. So all of those things, and sometimes much more subtle than those very obvious things. We talk, don't we, about having a gut feeling about something. We meet somebody or somebody says something, we just get that kind of feeling in our gut that, not sure about this. And it's often it's very definite. It's a yes or a no. And we feel it in the gut.
Right.
And we really need to pay attention to that.
I just saw an article this morning that said children won't tell you they have anxiety. They'll tell you they have a tummy ache.
Absolutely. Because they feel that anxiety in their gut, as I would do, and a lot of adults do. But they don't know what it is. All they know is that they've got cramps or nausea or a tummy ache of some sort.
Right. So how can we use, now that we understand what the enteric nervous system is, how could we use this relationship to focus on healing our gut and being more connected with our bodies so that we can work on healing our emotions? Because I think a lot of times let's say we have anxiety or depression, or we have, these different things come up. Maybe we have trauma from our past. And a lot of times we self-medicate with food, with alcohol, with street drugs, or even we get a prescription in order to cope. I think a lot of people walk around coping with symptoms.
Definitely.
And not healing from them, and then feeling so ashamed that they have this problem because they feel broken. So they made a decision somewhere along the way that they're not whole, complete, and perfect, and they're broken.
Yes.
And so they have emotional things that they're sort of shutting down, pushing to the side, or numbing. And it's manifesting in the physical body, like you said, around the gut through the enteric nervous system. And so there's the real definite emotional, mental connection to our physical health.
Yes.
And I love that you're addressing that we have to heal our emotional state and our gut at the same time, because even trauma, long-term trauma can cause gut imbalance. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So you may well have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experience study. And that was done in the States, over 17,000 people. And it was begun in about 1995, done over a long term. There have been a couple of brilliant books have come out of it. One is Childhood Disrupted, and one is The Deepest Well. Now, what that found, one of its big findings, was that early traumatic experience or adverse experience in the early years has a negative impact on the gut bacteria.
It's just fascinating.
So even at that stage, and there are other studies which show us the impact on the developing brain. So if we have early adverse childhood experience, that has an impact on us our entire life. It predisposes us to post-traumatic stress disorder. For example, if we're a man going to war, or if we have any other kind of trauma, which we know there are many different kinds.
Talk about how when we have trauma that it can negatively
Yes,
affect gut health.
absolutely. Yes. So, right from the beginning of our life, our gut health is impacted by our experiences, especially how safe we feel, how nurtured we feel. And a lot of those emotional experiences become embedded or held in the tissues of the gut. It's often a place where, if we have a trauma, we pile those emotions into our gut and then we disconnect from it. And a lot of people whose mental health is such that they dissociate find it very difficult to be present, to make relationships in their life. Everything is stuffed down into the gut tissues, and then they've like switched off from it. And I did that as well. And so then it's really hard to reach that emotional history in the physical tissues. And I think it's interesting also that the actual diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was created by psychologists who didn't really think about the gut as part of PTSD. And yet all the many people I have worked with, including myself, with PTSD, always have a gut problem.
It makes so much sense. I'm thinking about everyone I know with PTSD, and yet it's right. It's true. They all do have a gut work that they've been working on healing. So,
sure.
I mean, is it that adverse childhood events or trauma from our past disrupts the gut so much that it causes gut problems, or is it that gut problems? It isn't that gut problems cause emotional problems. It's that it starts on the emotional level and then manifests in the physical. Is that correct?
I think that's right, Ashley. I think it starts with the difficult events. It manifests in the gut. But of course, then it's going to create a kind of vicious loop. So, for example, if you've got a problem with the gut barrier, if you've got not a very healthy gut bacteria, maybe not diverse enough, maybe not the right ones, if you've got a slightly dysfunctional enteric nervous system from all these things that have happened in your life, then you're going to have low serotonin. That will also increase your anxiety. You're going to have the possibility of undigested food proteins and bacteria and virus getting into your systemic circulation and going up to your brain, further, enhancing your anxiety and depression again, and maybe causing inflammation in your central nervous system. And there's a huge correlation now between stuff from the gut going to the brain, creating inflammation, and that inflammation being correlated with depression. So I think it starts with the experience, but it then loops all the way back, and then things get kind of entrenched in a horrible circle.
Another thing the gut does, that a healthy gut and a healthy gut biome converts 25% of our T3, our T3 thyroid hormone.
Yeah.
And so someone with a perfectly healthy thyroid could show up in blood work with low T3 and be put on a medication when it actually wasn't the thyroid itself. It was their gut dysbiosis. So we have, like you said, the serotonin, so the feel-good, happy neurochemicals of the brain are made in the gut. And then we also have that, there's a nerve, right? The vagal nerve.
Yes, the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve that travels, it's a cranial nerve that travels all the way from the brain down into the gut.
That's right.
Is that part of the enteric nervous system, or is that affected? How's that play a role in all this?
So the vagus nerve is often called the superhighway between the gut and the brain and back again. It's also the biggest part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which allows us to rest and digest. So it's connected to the gut, and there are more messages that go from our gut nervous system up to the brain than go from the brain downwards to the gut. But we have to remember that as well as that vagal superhighway, which is really important, people talk a lot about vagal tone, and when we've got good vagal tone and a good functioning vagus nerve, we can heal ourselves really well. And when we haven't, we can't. And of course, with PTSD, we don't usually have that. However, there's also, it's more complex because we have the fact that the enteric nervous system can make its own decisions without talking to the brain and the head via the vagus nerve. So you have this massive communication superhighway, really important. You also have the autonomous aspect of the enteric nervous system. You also have the gut microbiome that's talking via the vagus nerve and to the autonomous aspect. So you've got so much complexity. It makes my brain hurt, to be honest, actually. And I figure the only way we can possibly work is to have a truly holistic approach to people, because it's too complicated to be able to work out what's happening with any particular individual. You have to go on a journey with them and explore and see.
Well, and we want to take, like you said, the holistic approach, because if we went in the allopathic medical system, which is the traditional, I don't want to say the word traditional, it is the modern, go to a hospital, right? Go to an MD. Most MDs, most hospitals practice allopathic medicine, which is
That's right.
reductionistic. Reductionistic meaning it's going to look at symptoms and systems of the body. You would go to a separate, I think because it's compartmentalized, this is probably the reason why it's taken us so long to acknowledge in medicine that there's a direct link and an integrated link between mental health and the gut health, because allopathic medicine it treats people reductionistically and also is segmented. It's so you go to one doctor for your gut, you go to a separate doctor in a separate building for mental health. And the two don't normally meet each other or talk to each other or really respect each other. And the gastroenterologist is going to want to use drugs and surgery, and they might suggest diet if they've taken courses outside of extracurricularly. They've taken some courses. Maybe they've understand that there actually is a relationship between food and gut health, but it's not mandatory to be a gastroenterologist. It's not mandatory to actually study nutrition.
No, that's right.
And then that's their wheelhouse, right? And then separately is mental health, and it's considered totally separate. And that's the problem with one of the problems with modern medicine is that it's reductionistic, in that we're going to only look at your pancreas, or we're going to only look at your stomach, and then we're going to give you some drugs for your stomach because you have GERD, or because you have diarrhea. Okay, we're going to do a colonoscopy. We're just going to look at the colon, and then we're just going to look at this, and then we're going to give you some drugs for this. But they're never going to see the big picture. They're never going to see the root cause that way. They're simply going to keep treating symptoms. And that's why probably why a lot of listeners are listening now, because they've been given the runaround. They've been on drug after drug, or therapy after therapy, or even holistic therapy after holistic therapy. And they feel like they're chasing their tail, or as I have often felt, like playing darts blindfolded. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to try this therapy, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't. But what's the root cause? And we really have to get that 30,000 view approach. We have to really back out, kind of like Google Earth, where you back out and you see the whole planet. Look at the whole body.
Yeah.
And look at your whole life. I like that you're going all the way back to adverse childhood events, because
Yeah.
that's where it starts. Even it could
Yeah.
start all the way at birth. Being a cesarean section
Yeah.
baby, being born cesarean affects the microbiome.
Yeah.
Having
Absolutely.
been put on antibiotics as a child, so it can compound. If we
Yes.
have poor gut health for a long time, and maybe some adverse childhood events or some trauma, and then, like you said, it might start with it probably starts with the emotional health, but
Mm,
then it just snowballs from there. And if we
mm.
had a weakened gut, because many people have been on antibiotics or eat a
Yes.
diet
Yeah.
that isn't supportive of their body
Yeah.
unknowingly, or
Yes.
been born cesarean. However, we have a weakened gut to begin with, and then
Mm,
couple that with some trauma from our past, and we're just trying to survive day to day. We're just getting up, getting our
mm,
coffee, and going to
mm.
work, and just trying to keep a roof over our head. We're you know
Yes.
we're kind of treading water, and we don't really feel like we even have the luxury to stop and process a lifetime's worth of trauma and stuff from our past, because we're afraid it might consume us. So for those who really do want to heal, and they really feel like they're chasing their tail, but they're kind of overwhelmed by it
Mm,
all, right?
mm.
By all the therapies and everything. How can we, and of course the overwhelm harms the enteric nervous system, and
Yeah, of
it harms the
course.
gut more, right?
Everything.
We need
Yeah.
to get ourselves back into a state of calm so we can heal.
Yes.
What are some
Yes.
steps we can take? So we've been chasing our
Okay.
tail, we're stressed out, that we've
Yes.
got bills to pay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And just to preface that, which I'll come to, it's it's so interesting because when I started to talk about it, the thing that really was frustrating and drove me into my day-to-day struggle on my own was people would say things like, if only you take the probiotic I take, you'd be fine.
Ugh.
Or if only you'd put lavender oil on your pillow, you'd sleep. Or go and see my hypnotherapist, she'll sort you out in one session. And there was such a lack of understanding out there and compassion that I was in that very isolated state. And I think that what I've come to realize, the biggest steps we can take are it's how we live our life. It's really all about that, how we live our life. So as far as the gut goes, I used to see my gut really as the enemy. It's like, oh no, not again. How am I going to cope with this? I've got diarrhea. I've got to go to work. I'm going to have to take some Imodium, whatever it is, or I'd be up in the night feeling horrible. And, with anxiety and my palpitations and nausea and all of that. And so I would get very frustrated and cross with my gut, which wasn't particularly helpful, but quite human. And I'm sure lots of other people listening have or are in that state. So my first thing was to take the big step of finding compassion for myself and my gut and begin to befriend it, connect, and listen, even if it's just sitting with your hands on for a while, with the intention of understanding, of listening, not judging, befriending, connecting, and breathing is also helpful. And then how we live our lives, that's one thing. So finding time to do things that help you to relax and get into that calm state, whether it's going for a walk at lunchtime from your job, by, somewhere, maybe you've got a park or somewhere you can go for a walk, or just sitting down somewhere peacefully and breathing, meditating for a few minutes. Maybe it's singing, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's Tai Chi, maybe it's social dance, whatever it is, playing tennis. But all these things add up together. There's not one big thing. I think there's a lot of little things looking at how you live your life with your gut in a compassionate way for yourself. And part of that, breathing and physical activity in those things matters. So your gut bacteria love being taken for a walk. And I know. I can tell. I have this image of mine all on little leads, and I'm taking them for a walk like lots of very tiny dogs. But they love it. It helps them get strong and healthy and grow the good ones, right?
I love that analogy. I have a friend with she has two Mastiff dogs, if you know what she doesn't have children, she has
Yes.
dogs. So Mastiffs
Yeah.
are the size of adults. They're
Huge.
They're huge.
Yes.
And and she will spend more on her dogs. I mean, they get dental work. They have,
Oh my
they go to the
word.
vet. They go to the dog park every like twice a day. They get home handmade treats. And
Oh,
she'll spend more time, energy, and money on her dogs than she would on her own health. Like she'll just,
yes.
it's pretty funny, and it's very common for dog owners, right?
Yeah.
To put their animals first. I mean, as parents, we put our kids first.
Yeah, we do.
But I love this analogy because often we won't take care of ourselves, but we would take our dog for a walk. Right?
Yes.
Or we take our child in the pram, right, for a walk, right?
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
won't take ourselves for a walk. So it's like,
Yeah.
what? You have this gut health. It's about between 3 and 6 pounds of
Yes.
bacteria. So
Yeah.
it's like a little, I don't know, a cat or a Shih Tzu, or
Yeah.
you have like, if we imagine we have like a internal pet, an animal, some
Oh,
animal
I like
that
that.
right?
I like, yes.
And it's and how we treat it is how it treats us.
Yes.
So if we ignore it and feed it McDonald's and whatever, then it's a very angry Chihuahua that we don't
And if we-
like.
Definitely, and shout at it
Right.
and hit it.
It wakes us up in the middle of the night. It gives us horrible indigestion, right? It gives us all kinds of nasty feelings throughout the day. But if we take it for a walk and we feed it good food and water,
Yes.
and we spend some time rubbing it, putting our hands on our
Yes.
belly,
Yeah, perfect.
we're nurturing that little inner pet, whatever we want
Yes.
it, whatever we identify, whatever animal, little kangaroo, I don't know, whatever we want it to be, little panda. I love it.
I love that. I've come to a whole new expansive idea now, Ashley, thanks to you. That I think I like the idea of having an inner panda.
Right. Right, because bacteria, it's kind of hard to emotionally connect with, even though it's like but what's really interesting about our gut biome, and I'm sure you know this, it's really interesting, and there's studies. I actually have a few of them printed out on my desk somewhere.
Yep.
There's studies now that show that the gut biome creates chemical signals to the brain to feed us more of what it needs. So if we have a disrupted gut biome, we've got a really bad gut biome, we've got the Chihuahua of gut biomes, then it actually causes us to crave bad foods for us that feed it. So if we're craving sugar, like refined sugar, and we're craving, caffeine and refined sugar and all kinds of junk food and fast food, it's actually not us. It's our brains being hijacked by the parasites.
Definitely. Yeah, because if we eat lots of sugar, we'll grow many more bacteria that eat that. That's their diet. So when they're hungry, they send the messages up saying, give me sugar now.
And it just hijacks our brain. And then we feel, I guess my body needs this, but it's not us. We're being hijacked by the 6 pounds of angry Chihuahua inside us. Yeah. And what's really interesting, though, is I never particularly liked kale until I started to eat a lot of raw kale. Because, of course, raw, organic, fresh vegetables and fruit is how you can populate the gut with those bacteria. I learned that when I studied to become a health coach at IIN, and I was blown away by this lecture on the microbiome of gardening and how a bacteria that are alive on your strawberries. When you go to even if you wash the strawberry, the bacteria is still there, and you eat the strawberry raw, of course, then the bacteria on strawberries that digest strawberries, if you just leave the strawberry and it sort of like molds and, decomposes, anyways, but you eat it before that happens. But that same bacteria that digests strawberries populates in your gut. and helps you to not only digest the strawberry, but helps you to assimilate the vitamins and the nutrients from that strawberry.
Yes.
And so the more strawberries you eat, the better you get at digesting strawberries. And so the more kale I ate, the more I began to crave it. And then I really knew that my little panda gut biome was taking control of my brain, because I began to have a Pavlovian response to kale, and I'd start to salivate, get really excited for, and even crave kale. So we can retrain our gut to make us want to eat healthy.
So we can retrain our little inner pet. Mm-hmm. And the other interesting thing about the pet is that it's constantly talking to all the parts of our enteric nervous system. Mm. So it's talking to the enteric neurons all the time, and the immune system and the hormones in the gut. So nothing happens on its own. The gut bacteria do not act on their own, nor does the enteric nervous system, nor does the immune system, nor does the endocrine system in the gut. They're all talking to each other the whole time. And decisions are being made on the basis of those conversations. So everything needs to work.
How does the enteric nervous system affect our emotional health?
So the enteric nervous system affects our emotional health because if it's not functioning well, we will have low serotonin, low dopamine. Also, if we have emotional difficulties, trauma, whatever it might be, that will impact and create tension and strain patterns through the nerve fibers, the different layers of the intestine and colon, which will make it very difficult for the enteric nervous system to work properly.
Mm. So as you began to explore these last 4 or 5 years, as you began to really dive into gut health, I mean, you've been really into it for a very long time. Like you've been doing therapy with people for a really long time. So you've been into healing emotional health, and you've been into CranioSacral for 25 years. So helping people in that way. But in the last, like you said, 4 or 5 years, it's really been your focus has been on gut health. As you began to make these connections, what changes did you see in your own health?
So I began to understand, well, the first thing that changed was I found some compassion for my gut health, and I began to understand better all the many messages it was giving me and where they were coming from in terms of my emotional history. So that awareness and understanding is itself very empowering. I began to realize I needed to look at that stuff and to take some pressure off myself in my life and the way I lived it in order to give it time to heal properly. I've also worked with a nutritional therapist to give it the other stuff that it needed to heal. So, I'm not a nutritionist, but I think that's, as we've said in this conversation, that's a really important part of gut health and of gut healing. But so there's the nutritional aspect I've addressed, looking at how I live my life now and looking at the emotional history in my gut. And so the changes are coming fast and furious now for me. And interestingly, in my clients, I'll have a client who's done everything, tried everything, eaten everything, not eaten everything, has had constipation for decades, had a couple of cranial gut sessions, so to speak, and now goes every day. And it was an emotional event that she'd been holding on to, was disconnected from in her gut for such a long time.
So she was chronically constipated, and after having an emotional healing event, she now goes regularly?
Yes.
Wow. What about the opposite? What about people who are inflamed and have diarrhea?
Oh, absolutely. Similar. So I'm getting some really encouraging results from people who come with chronic long-term gut problems that they can't seem to resolve. And I work with my hands just as I would with my other cranial work, very light and gently on the gut, going where the gut needs me, all the different layers of the intestine, the colon, palpating with intention into the places where I can feel strain patterns and tension, and just staying there, giving it an opportunity to release if it's appropriate. And often the emotional stuff will come up.
As the emotional stuff comes up, do they talk to you? Do they cry? Do they
Yeah.
just breathe? Like, how do they process it?
So sometimes all of those three, or maybe one of those three. It may just be some tears. There may be, oh, so this is it. I remember, and I was blah, 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 blah. There'll be a story. Sometimes they'll just breathe deeply. There may be a few tears. They don't need to talk. That's absolutely fine. So it can express itself in many different ways. But there's usually a bit of an aha about where that came from. And it's often something that they wouldn't have been able to get to in a kind of rational, I'm trying to work it out way. It comes from a deeper place because it's coming from the tissues of the body.
So you've taken Dr. Upledger's craniosacral therapy and applied it to taken it away from the traditional working on the basically around the spine, and you're working on the gut, but on a very, very light, gentle, slow. So because you're not trying to work on muscles like you said, like a massage therapist, you're working on the fascia and the nerves.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm applying the cranial techniques and the cranial approach, which is obviously meeting someone where they are without an agenda, with a light listening touch, creating a safe space between you and the person on the table, non-judgment. But I'm doing all of those things, but I'm doing it with the tissues of the gut.
Now, since you created this type of therapy, I mean, like, you expanded upon Dr. Upledger's work, but you really did pioneer this specific technique. Have you had therapists do your technique on you?
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, a bit more now because at first there was only me. But yes, I have, and it's been wonderful. Yeah. And I'm very fortunate now. I travel and teach it to lots of other therapists, so I get messages from all over the place now saying how helpful it is in clinical practice.
If someone wanted to get a session, how would they find a craniosacral therapist who has your certification?
Well, they would look at the list of therapists on let me see, it'd be the website of the International Association of Healthcare Educators. And they would look for somebody who's done my class amongst the other classes they've done, which will be by their name. So my training is called CST and Listening to the Second Brain. So the acronym for my class is CLSB.
Okay.
And that would appear, they'll have done the basic training, they might have done a brain class and the immune course, and you'll also see CLSB, and they'll have done my training.
Excellent. Can you share any stories of what's come about as you've been traveling and teaching this? Any really brilliant stories as practitioners have learned in the class, or have had like aha moments while they're learning from you?
Absolutely. So many really. There's one class I was teaching in, where was I? I think I must have been it was either Boston or Denver. And there were a lot of equine therapists there. And they had light bulbs going off all the time because apparently horses I'm not a horse person, so I didn't know this. I'm more of a panda person. So maybe they'll have baby horses in their guts. Anyway,
Yeah.
So the equine therapists were going, oh my God, this is going to be amazing for our horses. So they went away and applied these techniques to their horses, and I've had messages saying how it's really helped horses with their irritable bowel or the equine equivalent of that.
Oh my gosh, that's really neat. I got to tell
So
you,
that's really, yeah,
so I'll tell you a story. I've had Eric Thornton on the show several times. He's
yes,
a spiritual healer,
hmm,
very practical, down to earth.
yeah.
And I live in a part of Washington State near Woodinville where there's a lot of horses. It's horse area,
Ah, okay,
and
yes,
English style riding, not cowboys. And
yeah,
so it's actually kind of the uniform of people in Woodinville to walk around in English riding gear, minus the helmet, basically, and the
okay,
crop.
yeah,
But like even if you don't own a horse, you just walk around in like the boots and the riding pants. It's
yes,
funny, but that's sort of our that's our area for you.
yeah, yeah,
Lots
yeah,
of horses. So he works with humans and with animals, and he's been doing it for a long time. And he shared a story in one of our interviews that really blew my mind.
yeah.
A horse had been having miscarriages,
Ah,
and this
okay.
horse was also very sort of acted as though it was depressed, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. They had the vet come and do everything they could do, and
Mm.
the rider was about a 12 or 13-year-old girl, and so Eric comes up to the horse, and they explain what the problem was, and he basically talked to the horse. The horse shared with him what was going
Mm.
on, and he turned to the girl and said, "Your horse is so depressed, so sad,
Oh,
has so much grief because she's lost her babies." And
oh,
so she couldn't, like, no one could ride her. She was just really very unmotivated as a horse. And so Eric said to her, just go into the stall with her and sit with her and
mm.
feel the grief with her and be present to her, and just
Yes.
imagine what it would feel like having lost your baby. Of course, this young girl's about 13, but
Mm-hmm.
she hasn't had that experience, but she could, be
No,
empathetic. And
sure.
so the girl just sat with her horse in her stall and felt the grief with her, and the next day the horse was fine, and then she went on to
Wow.
conceive. And so it was just a very interesting that we can help process emotions with our animals,
Absolutely.
and that animals can hold on to trauma just like we can. And I thought
Yes.
that was really interesting. So the fact that you can use craniosacral therapy with animals is really cool, but then that you can also help them on an emotional level
Yes.
is really neat as well. When our son was born, we used craniosacral therapy with him, and it made a really big
Yes.
difference in
Yeah.
making it a very gentle experience. I love craniosacral therapy, and I love that you're incorporating it for gut health. I think
Mm.
that's really cool. Do you have any more stories that come to mind that you'd love to share with us?
Well, of course, some of the stories involve people's emotional stories, which I'm not sure I could talk about, but in case, obviously they're very personal. Um, but people have had, they've realized, for example, people with eating disorders. There was a lady who'd had an eating disorder for many, many, many years. And as I'm sure you appreciate, it's something that's really, really difficult to overcome. And as I was working on the layers of her small intestine, she connected back, just came into her awareness, hidden in this really massive tension I was feeling in this particular layer. In fact, it was the basement membrane, which is one of the many layers in the small intestine, of experience she'd had when she was tiny and being weaned by her parents, by her mother, which was a really difficult and traumatic experience for her. And that had completely coloured her attitude to food, and from then her ability to eat in a healthy, happy way and digest her food. And so it started right back then. She hadn't really thought about that and only barely remembered it in the past. But because we were right there in the part of her intestine where the tension was held, it came up into her awareness. she realized where we talked about it, just open questions on my part, allowing her to tell her story. And as she did that, the tissue released and released and released, and she felt very relaxed. And then the next time I saw her, she said it was like you just flipped a switch. She said, my body is now able to process my food so much more easily. And so obviously she didn't go immediately into, oh yeah, I can eat anything and I'm fine. But it made a huge change. And it was just that place, that membrane in that part of her intestine that was holding that trauma from when she was less than a year old.
So sometimes we don't even know consciously what we need to work on.
Exactly. I think very often we don't, in my experience, and we try and work it out rationally, and usually that doesn't get us very far. I think we have to go deeper than that.
Well, I can see your tool, your technique being a great tool for therapists for many different kinds of therapists, but for holistic health providers, because if they can help the person to release and also help the person to become conscious of what's going on, then that just it could save them years of work, right? To try to find that root cause. So how can someone take your class if you've piqued their interest, now they really want to learn this technique for themselves and for others? How can they take your class?
So at the moment, my class is for up-ledger craniosacral therapists. So they will know about the class, they can take it. So I've been asked quite a few times recently to develop a training for other therapists, which I haven't done as yet. The other way in which other therapists could use it as a tool is to read the book, because a lot of this is in the book. It's actually written for therapists or lay people to give people strategies, to give them the understanding of the anatomy of the layers. So even a lay person could put their hands on their own gut and start to connect in and discover these places. And if, lots of people who've bought my book have been my clients, but also other therapists doing other kinds of body work. So that would be, at the moment, the best way for people to access some of these ideas and techniques.
Is there any lesson from the book that you'd like to teach us today?
Oh, yes. Okay, there's so many, but let's choose one that's a nice, simple one to start with. So we talked about it being a long tube from the mouth down to the anus. And so if we think about the long tube as being the outside world really coming inside us. So everything in the long tube is in the outside world until we absorb any of it into our body. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that idea was first mooted by Michael Gershon in The Second Brain many years ago. So one thing you can always do is put your hands, one on your belly, maybe one on your chest, thinking about the esophagus, or one on your belly, one on your stomach, wherever feels right in that moment. And just allow yourself to connect into your long tube with your intention and maybe visualizing it, your breath. And just ask yourself the question, how does my long tube feel? How am I responding to the outside world coming in? Am I very relaxed and embracing the things that come in? Or am I more guarded? Or maybe I have some tension or more fearful? How does it feel? How am I responding to that outside world? Really, it's one of the main places we respond to our lives. So we can just sit quietly, hands on, say, belly, stomach, esophagus, breathe, connect into our long tube and just ask ourselves that question, how does it feel? How is it responding? How am I responding to the outside world? and see what happens.
Just slow, deep breaths and close your eyes and just become
Yeah,
aware.
just go inside, become aware, listen with your hands. And if the answer to that question is, oh, it feels, I don't know, like there's tension, like it's guarded, then maybe just acknowledge that, send the breath there, listen to that, and that sometimes the body loves being listened to. That can be enough for things to start to release. Or you might feel the tension and become aware of an event or an emotion. So it's really a journey of exploration.
What does listen with your hands mean?
So you're listening into the body to feel if there's tension there. Does it feel relaxed or tense? Does it feel warm or cold? Do I feel, what can I feel in there? What's my felt sense of my inner world? So we're just really palpating, touching with an intention to notice, to feel what's going on under the surface.
Beautiful. And how long should we do this for?
Well, you could just do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or as long as you have. But even just doing that, say for 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes a day, we can gradually become more connected. We can find some compassion. We can befriend that part of us a little bit. So what I would say is I'd really encourage you just to sit with it and not worry if you think, oh, I don't know if I can feel anything, because it can take a little bit of time. Just have that intention each time you sit, and gradually things will change. And you'll notice things.
I think this would be good to do right before we eat.
Yeah, definitely.
Take the time. I know prayer before a meal is a common
Yeah,
practice, but we could also take the time to close our eyes and breathe and go within, which would help to put us out of stress response and into rest and digest response.
I
And
think
also
that's a
just
brilliant idea.
listen to the gut, because I think a lot of times, we'll eat in front of the TV, or while standing by the sink, or we'll eat in front of the computer.
Yeah.
We're not truly aware of what's going on, what our body, with the signals of our body. And I remember as a child, my mom would talk about that we have an internal thermostat, and many people's it's not that the thermostat's broken, but it's like the wires are cut, and we often
Yes.
we eat far more than we need, but we're not even digesting it correctly, because we're out of rest and digest mode, or the sympathetic nervous system response of fight or flight. So our resources are shunted away from the gut, or we have lower stomach acid. So really we're not fully digesting, and then we have a lot of gas and bloating because we're not digesting, we're fermenting. And then we're not really absorbing. And what we are absorbing is kind of fermented and partially digested, and it's leaky gut. And
Not great.
I was just talking to a colon hydrotherapist over the weekend, and she said, when you have really smelly farts, right? So it's like really, you just smell like, oh, horrible, especially those who might be allergic to dairy and not realize it, right? So you just smell something and it smells putrid, like something's rotting in your gut. She said, your colon absorbs most of your water. And if the water in your gut it smells that way, smells basically this putrid, it's like a swamp, right? Your body is actually absorbing putrid swamp water. What do you think that's doing to all your organs, right? It's not this, the pristine water you drank has been contaminated by, the dysbiosis, and by the, maybe you're in stress mode, so you're not really digesting, so you're fermenting. But basically, by the time your water gets to the colon, it's now putrid swamp water. And we wonder why we have brain fog, and we can't sleep, and we're, our energy zapped, and we wonder why we feel so gross, right? So it's like it's a vicious cycle, but we have to break it somewhere.
We have to
And
break it. Yeah.
yeah, and if it and we have to break the vicious cycle. And if it takes, before we eat for 5 minutes at every meal, right before we eat, if we could just do some
Yeah.
slow, deep breathing into our belly, put our hands on our belly and our heart, get connected, check in. I love the imagery of checking in with the tube from our mouth
Mm,
to our anus, just checking in with
mm,
that tube and just
mm.
and relaxing the belly and letting the belly just fall out of the of the pelvic floor. Just let it all fall out, because I think sometimes we
Yeah.
just suck it all in and it's all hard, and just
Yes,
let the belly soften,
definitely.
and then
Great idea.
just connect and
It's a
connect with
great
the
idea.
inner panda. And
Connect with
just
our inner panda. I
yeah,
think that's such a good idea before we eat. And
right.
it's so interesting what you were saying there, because our Western idea of the belly is it should be taut and flat and hard, and it shouldn't look like what it is, because we don't want to think about poo going through a tube. But if we look at Eastern tradition, the gut, the lower dantian, the lower navel, is the center of emotional and spiritual growth.
Mm.
So, how did we get to where we are? So, what you were saying about the prayer and the meditation before eating and the allowing it to soften is beautiful. That's exactly what we can do.
For the last 100 years or so, I mean, if you look at history, there's been a concerted effort throughout all of history to try to suppress us and control the masses. If you look at
Mm,
um, the way in which they've used religion, all religion, throughout the world, in the way which they've enforced or created wars, right? My religion's
yes.
better than your religion. We're going to kill you, or you have to convert, whatever. I mean, if you look at the
Yeah.
history of government, for example, why all the Christian holidays are actually on top of pagan holidays. It's very interesting how the history of the last 5,000 years. Look at human history and look at how governments and religion have worked at controlling people.
Yeah.
None of them have wanted us to be in our own power.
No.
We are very dangerous when we are empowered, when we are in the seat of our own
Mm,
power, connected to source, connected to our creator, and
mm,
connected to our heart and connected to our soul, and have health. When we are in
yeah.
full health and in full power, we are a danger to those who want to control us. So
Mm,
we need to examine our belief system, and examine who instilled these beliefs about our body, like what the ideal body looks like.
yeah,
Where
exactly.
does that come from? Because really,
Yeah.
there's so many layers to what we have been taught, and what we have unconsciously accepted as
Mm,
truth.
mm, yes.
So, what you think is beautiful, or what your belief system around beauty, about being, like you said, that the hard and flat tummy,
Mm,
that might be part of the mechanism of keeping us distracted, so we don't connect with, because I look at it as being unnatural. Like, if we're
mm,
so focused on getting a boob job and getting a nose job, and if we're so
mm,
focused on what we wear, and if we're so focused on this external like look of something we are not, and
mm.
we want to be something we're not, and we have this, like, oh, if only I had more money, if only I had more time, if only I had more energy.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they keep us wanting and wanting and wanting, then we cannot focus on being in our own power. And so I think,
Mm,
to get back into our own empowerment, we have to take it into our own hands. No one's going to give it to us. And I
yeah.
love that your technique, doing it right before each meal, like 3 times a day, sit, breathe for 5 minutes, pray, meditate, connect with yourself again, with the intention to come back into your power, to heal yourself.
Mm,
Be, because the powers that be don't want us to be empowered and fully healed.
mm,
And so, we just have to examine our belief system around, well, what is beautiful, and why do I want that, and what is health, and what is, you know why am I doing what I'm doing? And why am I desiring what I'm desiring? And is it my authentic self, or has it been something that's been imposed upon me because of society, is
Mm,
designed that way to keep us all sheeple, right? So
yeah.
I love that. I love,
Sheeple, yeah.
right? I love that
It's so true. So true.
your technique is helping us come into our own power and listen to ourselves and
Mm,
connect with ourselves again, because the mainstream media and the mainstream collectiveness does not want us to know that we can get in touch with our intuition, and
no,
that we can get in touch with our body, and our body can speak to us, and that we can actually heal. Right. So these are radical ideas that you're throwing out here. And I love it. We have to kind of be radical. We have to go up against we have to swim upstream. We have to go be like salmon,
definitely.
totally going against the
Definitely.
norm.
Yeah.
Especially, we don't want to live like a statistic. You know, the number one killer
No.
is heart disease. 1 in 3 people will have a cancer diagnosis. 1 in 3 people
Yeah.
have prediabetes or are obese. The statistics are horrible. We have to go, if we want to be a statistic, do what everyone else is doing. If we don't want to be a statistic, we have to be the salmon and be willing to challenge the norm and go upstream. So I love what you're doing, because you are helping people get empowered.
And that's what Dr. John Upledger taught me. He said that our job is to empower people, to give them choices. And that's always been my focus, because I completely agree with everything you're saying. The only thing is, if we're a salmon, can we have an inner panda? I'm not sure about that. And by the way, laughing is very good for our vagal health.
You know, that's one of my one of the homework I give my clients is on their lunch breaks. I get a lot of busy clients. I don't have time to do this. I have time to that. I get them
Yeah,
to, on their lunch break, go on YouTube and look up, you know, Comedy Central or whatever,
yes,
and watch, you know, a 5, 10, or 15-minute comedy act, right?
yeah,
And just laugh, you know, go for
yeah.
walks, go get out of the office, go for a walk, listen to comedy,
Mm,
laugh and walk and breathe. And that
mm, perfect.
we have to actually schedule time throughout the
Yeah,
day to help our enteric nervous system and help our autonomic nervous system to go back into healing mode and come out of stress mode.
definitely. It's really important.
Brilliant. Nikki, is there anything else you'd like to make sure that you teach us today before we wrap up today's interview?
I think just the only other thing is to say that anybody there who is listening to this, who has felt isolated with these issues, ashamed, secret, unable to talk, I'm talking about my issues. I talk about mental health and bowel movements with my clients all the time. I just encourage you to talk about it. We all need to talk about it. And it doesn't make you any less. It doesn't make you less functional, less competent. It makes you a human being.
Talk
So,
about it with the right people.
with the right people, yes,
Right. With the
yes,
people who are receptive, who will hold a loving space for you.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because the Japanese, if they crack a pot, say it breaks, a piece of pottery, they will put it together with some gold colored glue, because they say that pot is more precious than the one that hasn't been broken.
Exactly. I've looked at every part of my life when I felt broken, and I look back and I just see that forged me into an even more beautiful person. And so
Exactly.
when we're at our depths, when we're at our lowest, know that in 5, 10 years, you'll look back and be grateful for the tragedy and the sorrow you have now,
Yeah.
and to keep going, and use it as a tool to slingshot you into your healing.
Yes. Quite.
Nikki Kenward, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Listeners can go to nikkikenward.com to access your information. Is that the best place to go to buy your book as well?
I have another link for my book, which is nikkikenward.store.
Okay, excellent.
And if they're in America, though, they might do better to go onto the International Association of Healthcare Educators website. where their products are, because it will be cheaper to get it from there in America.
Okay, we'll make sure those links are all in the show notes of
Yeah,
today's
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Excellent. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for having me, Ashley.
For high-quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic True Health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program.